Welcome to Pillow Time Lore, where dreams take shape and stories wrap around you like your favorite blanket. You've made it through the day, and now it's time to slow down, breathe deeply, and drift into a world made just for you. So, fluff up your pillow, snuggle into your coziest spot, and let your eyes get heavier with each word. This is your moment. No to-do lists, no noise, just stillness and a little magic. With each breath in, feel the tension melt from your shoulders. With each breath out, let go of everything that doesn't serve your peace. You're safe here. Tonight's story is soft and soothing, like a warm cup of tea for your thoughts, carefully crafted to calm your busy mind and help you drift gently into sleep. So close your eyes, dear dreamer. Let your imagination wander while I carry you into a land where anything is possible and everything ends in peace. This is Pillow Time Lore. In a town that felt like two halves of a forgotten puzzle, a boy named Leo lived with his grandmother. Their home was on one side of a great dark ravine, a deep crack in the earth that had torn the town in two. The other side, a mirror image of their own, felt like a faraway land a long time ago. A terrible storm had swept away their only bridge, a strong wooden path that had once connected everyone. Now, the ravine was a place of fear, a silent space between two communities. The adults of the town, tired from the storm and the difficult work of rebuilding, had stopped talking about the other side. They had gotten used to living apart. The children, too, were taught a simple rule: never go near the ravine. It was a place of danger and sadness. But Leo, a thoughtful and gentle boy, couldn't shake the feeling that something important was missing. He would sit by the edge of the ravine, watching the distant houses and the children playing on the other side. He would watch them from afar and imagine their games and their laughter. He felt a deep sadness for his divided town. He longed to know the names of the children on the other side, to share a story, to maybe even just wave. It was more than just a feeling. It was a quiet ache in his heart. The ravine was not just a physical divide. It was a symbol of all the lost laughter and forgotten stories. He knew that their town was not whole. It was two halves, and it was a deep sadness for him. He wished with all his heart that he could talk to the children on the other side, and maybe, just maybe, they could do something about it. He held a small wooden boat in his hands, a gift from his grandfather, and he wondered if it could carry a message. It was a small thought, but it was the start of a great idea. On a quiet afternoon, as Leo sat by the ravine's edge, he saw a flash of color on the other side. A girl with bright, curious eyes was sitting with a sketchbook, painting the trees on her side of the forest. Her name was Maya, and she was a brilliant painter. The two of them, separated by the deep chasm, began to shout to one another. Their voices, carried by the wind, were faint but full of hope. "I'm Leo," he called out. "I love to build things." "I'm Maya," she shouted back. her voice like a happy bird. "I love to paint." Leo, inspired by her friendly voice, had an idea. He took out the small wooden boat his grandfather had given him, the one he had been holding in the last chapter, and placed a tiny, rolled-up note inside. He then tied a long, thin rope to the boat, a rope he had made himself. He carefully lowered the boat into the chasm, watching as the wind caught its small sail. The boat swayed and dipped, but it made it across to the other side. Maya, with a look of pure wonder, opened the note. It was a drawing of a bridge. Soon, other children, drawn by the shouts and the sight of the little boat, came to the ravine's edge. A boy with a loud, friendly voice, a storyteller named Sam, joined their group. A girl named Lily, who was a talented weaver, came too, and a young carver. A boy named Tom joined them, his hands still dusty from his work. They all began to shout their names and their talents across the ravine. The ravine, once a place of silence and fear, was now a place of shouted dreams and shared hope. It was no longer a place that divided them. It was a place that connected them. Tired of just shouting across the ravine, the children felt a deep need to do more. Their shared hope had grown too big to stay on their separate sides. They all agreed that they couldn't just talk, they had to act. The adults had told them it was impossible, that the ravine was too wide and too dangerous, and that a bridge was just a distant memory. But the children, with their imaginations as bright as the sun, refused to listen to a word of it. "We can't build a bridge of wood or stone," Leo said, his voice full of a new kind of courage. "We're not big enough for that." The storyteller, Sam, a boy with a voice that could make you feel anything, smiled a wide, brilliant smile. "Then we'll build a bridge of something else," he shouted. "We'll build a bridge of stars." The idea hung in the air, beautiful and impossible. They couldn't build a real bridge, but they could build a symbol of their connection. A bridge that would show the grown-ups and the whole town that they were still one. Maya, the painter, shouted her idea across the chasm. "I can paint the stars and the moon on it." The weaver, Lily, called out, "I can weave threads that will shine in the moonlight." And Leo, the master builder, promised to make the frame, the strong wooden bones of their impossible project. The ravine, once a place of silence and fear, was now a place of whispered plans and shouted ideas. The children, with their unique talents, had a new purpose. They were no longer just children who were separated. They were a team, united by a brilliant, impossible idea. They would build a bridge that was not meant to be walked on, but to be looked at and remembered. A bridge that would show everyone the power of shared hope. With the idea of a bridge of stars filling his heart, Leo knew exactly what his job was. As the master builder of their project, he had to create the strong wooden bones of their impossible bridge. He went to his grandfather's old shed and found the wood and tools he needed. He worked with a quiet, fierce focus. The sound of his hammer, a steady rhythm against the quiet of his side of the ravine. He wasn't just building with wood. He was building with hope. He made a small, strong wooden frame, a tiny replica of a real bridge, with every piece fitting together perfectly. When his bridge was ready, he took it to the edge of the ravine. The other children, watching from their side, shouted encouragement. He tied a long, thin rope to the bridge, a rope made of the strongest threads he could find. His grandmother, seeing his serious face, came to help him. Together, they carefully lowered the small bridge into the chasm, holding the rope tight as the wind tried to push it back. The bridge swayed and danced in the air, a tiny, brave symbol of their dream on the other side. Maya and the other children were waiting. They had a rope of their own, and as Leo's small bridge reached their side, they grabbed it with shouts of joy. They tied their rope to his, a simple knot that felt stronger than any stone. For the first time since the storm, there was a physical connection between the two sides of the town. It was just two ropes and a small wooden bridge. But it was enough. The children on both sides of the ravine looked at the two ropes, now joined, and a feeling of immense hope filled them. The ravine no longer felt like a place of fear and sadness. It felt like a place of courage and friendship. The small wooden bridge, swaying gently in the middle, was no longer just wood. It was the first step of their impossible dream, a promise of a new future for their town. With the rope now connecting both sides of the ravine, a new sense of purpose filled the children's hearts. The tiny wooden bridge model, a symbol of their master builder Leo's hope, swayed gently in the middle. Now it was time for the next part of their project. This was where Lily, the talented weaver, would begin her work. Lily was a quiet girl, but her hands moved with a beautiful, fast grace. She loved to weave, and she saw stories in every thread. With the children's help, she set up a small, simple loom on her side of the ravine. She chose threads of every color imaginable, deep blues like the night sky, silver threads like starlight, and gold threads like a harvest moon. As she worked, her fingers wove a beautiful pattern of stars and moons, a stunning reflection of their dreams. The weaving was a patient process. It took days, but the children on both sides of the ravine were always there to help. They would hold the threads for Lily, making sure they didn't tangle in the wind. Maya, the painter, would shout ideas for new colors, and Sam, the storyteller, would sing soft, gentle songs to give Lily a steady rhythm. The ravine, once a place of silence and fear, was now a beautiful, humming workshop. Slowly, a long, beautiful ribbon of woven stars and moons began to stretch across the ravine. It was not strong enough to hold a person, and they all knew it, but it was not meant for walking. It was a beautiful, powerful symbol of their unity, a visible sign of their shared dream. As the last thread was woven and the ribbon was connected to Leo's rope, a feeling of deep joy and triumph filled them all. The ravine was now bridged by a ribbon of stars and moons, a beautiful, shining thread of hope that connected their hearts. With the ribbons of woven stars now stretched across the ravine, the children on both sides looked at their creation with awe. The wind whispered through the threads, making a soft, gentle sound, but their bridge of stars was not yet complete. It needed a voice. This was Sam's job. Sam was a boy with a loud, friendly voice and a heart full of stories. He was the town's storyteller, and his words were as powerful as any tool. He stood on his side of the ravine, took a deep breath, and began to sing. His voice was strong and clear, and it traveled across the chasm, filling the silent space with a beautiful melody. He sang songs of their town's past, of the beautiful stories that had been lost when the bridge fell. He sang a song about a great hero who had once saved a child from a rushing river. He sang about a kind woman who would leave warm bread on her doorstep for anyone who was hungry. He sang of the laughter, the friendship, and the shared dreams that had once connected their two communities. The songs gave the bridge a voice, a beautiful melody that reminded the children that they were one town, not two. As Sam sang, the other children listened. They weren't just hearing a song, they were hearing their history. They were feeling the warmth of the baker's bread and the courage of the hero. The songs filled the ravine with a memory of all the good that their town had once been. Maya, the painter, felt a new sense of purpose in her heart. Leo, the master builder, felt a deeper pride in his work. And all the children on both sides felt a new sense of connection, a shared history that was no longer lost. The ravine, once a place of fear, was now a place of beautiful echoes and shared songs. After Sam's songs had filled the ravine with the echoes of their shared past, the children knew their bridge was almost ready. It had the strong frame of Leo's hope, the woven beauty of Lily's threads, and the ancient voice of Sam's stories. Now, it was time for the final touches. The young carver, Tom, whose hands were small but strong, had been carving tiny symbols all along. He had carved a small bird to represent a song, a leaf to represent a tree, and a simple heart to represent a family. The children on both sides of the ravine passed the symbols back and forth, tying them to the bridge with thin, golden threads. Each symbol was a final whisper of their connection, a small piece of their soul. Finally, the last symbol was tied, and the children stood back. Their bridge of stars was complete. It was a beautiful, long ribbon of woven threads, painted stars, and tiny carved symbols that stretched across the ravine. It was not a real bridge, and it wasn't strong enough to hold a person, but it was a perfect symbol of their shared hope and their new friendship. The sun went down, and the moon rose high in the sky. The bridge, catching the moonlight, began to shine with a soft, beautiful glow. The silver threads shimmered, the painted stars seemed to twinkle, and the tiny carved symbols cast gentle shadows on the ravine's walls. It was a beautiful and gentle reminder of their connection, a bridge that was not for walking on, but for looking at and remembering. The children, sitting on both sides of the ravine, looked at their work with a deep sense of pride and awe. They were no longer two separate groups of children. They were a team, a family, united by their bridge. The ravine, which had once been a place of fear, was now a place of silent beauty and shared dreams. They had done the impossible. They had built a bridge, not with wood and stone, but with their courage, their unique talents, and their amazing hope. The sun rose on a quiet morning, and the bridge of stars shimmered with a gentle glow. The first person to see it was Leo's grandmother, who stepped out for her morning tea. She saw the long, beautiful ribbon of woven threads and painted stars stretching across the ravine, and tears filled her eyes. She was not sad. She was deeply moved. The children had done the impossible. Soon, other adults began to gather. They stood at the edge of the ravine, their faces filled with a quiet awe. They saw the painted stars and the woven moons, and they heard the soft whisper of the wind through the threads. The ravine, which had once been a place of fear, was now a place of silent beauty and hope. The adults, who had long ago given up on the idea of a new bridge, began to talk in hushed, amazed tones. They realized that the children had not just built a beautiful piece of art. They had built a message that said, "It is not impossible to connect." We had just forgotten how the beautiful act of unity and hope had shown them that a bridge was not about wood and stone, but about people working together, sharing their unique talents and dreams. The adults looked at the children's work and felt a deep sense of regret and shame. They had been so focused on their own work and their own side of the ravine that they had forgotten the most important thing: to be a community. The children's bridge of stars was a gentle, beautiful reminder of all the hope and courage they had lost. The adults looked at each other, and in their eyes there was a new light. They knew that the children had shown them the way, and it was now their turn to build a real bridge, a strong path of wood and stone that would finally unite their town. The morning after the adults saw the bridge of stars, the town was filled with a new kind of energy. The fear and sadness were gone, replaced by a deep sense of purpose. The adults, inspired by the children's beautiful act, came together at the edge of the ravine, ready to build. The sound of hammers and the smell of fresh-cut wood filled the air, a stark contrast to the quiet silence that had ruled the town for so long. The children, who had started the whole idea, were not just spectators. They were a part of the building team. Leo, the master builder, worked with the adults, using his strong hands to help with the wood. Maya, the painter, drew beautiful, simple plans for the bridge, and Sam, the storyteller, sang songs of courage and hope to keep everyone's spirits up. The whole town was a single humming workshop, a beautiful symphony of shared work and newfound friendship. As the real bridge began to take shape, the children's bridge of stars was carefully taken down. It was a moment of deep meaning for everyone. The ribbons were no longer a bridge across the ravine, but a symbol of their courage. The adults hung it in the town square, a beautiful, gentle reminder that the real bridge was not just a path for walking, but a lesson about working together and sharing their unique talents. The days passed, and the two sides of the ravine grew closer and closer. The adults worked with a joy they had forgotten they had, and the children sang songs and shared stories. The bridge, a strong path of wood and stone, was a beautiful, powerful symbol of a town that had found its heart again. The day the new bridge was finished was a day of great celebration. The town, no longer separated by the deep, dark ravine, came together with a joy that felt as warm as the summer sun. The bridge, a strong path of wood and stone, was a symbol of their courage and their newfound hope. The entire town gathered to watch as the first people walked across, their steps filled with a happiness that had been lost for too long. Leo and his friends, no longer separated, met in the middle of the bridge. Maya, the painter, gave Leo a hug. Sam, the storyteller, told a new, happy story right there. In the middle of the bridge, they laughed and played, their voices filling the air with a sound that felt more beautiful than any song. The ravine, once a place of fear, was now a place of shared laughter and friendship. They had done the impossible. They had built a real bridge. As the sun set, the children and the adults all gathered in the town square, and there, hanging for everyone to see, was the Bridge of Stars. It was a beautiful, shining ribbon of woven threads and painted stars, a reminder that the strongest bridges are not made of wood or stone, but of friendship, hope, and the shared effort of a community. The old bridge had been lost in a storm, but the new bridge had been built with love. Leo looked at his friends, and then at the Bridge of Stars hanging in the square. He knew that the ravine was now a thing of the past. The town was united, and their friendship was a beautiful, strong path that would connect them forever. The boy who loved to build things had built the most important thing of all, a town's heart.